All right, listen, fuckers. This is about Emily Dickinson, but it does not start out directly addressing her. We'll get to you just fucking pay attention. I'm going to start with two epigraphs. If only one could taste one's void, if one could really rest in one's void, and this void were not a certain kind of being, but not quite death either. That's Antonin Artaud on death. Here's Deleuze and Guattari on death. Death is not desired, there is only death that desires, by virtue of the body without organs or the immobile motor, and there is also life that desires, by virtue of the working organs. There we do not have two desires, but two parts, two kinds of desiring machine parts, and the dispersion of the machine itself. And yet the problem persists. How can all that function together? Okay. All right. Let's do Deleuze and Guattari. I'm going to get to Emily Dickinson as fast as I can, you fucking assholes. Okay, so there is a life which drives itself. Life drive. There is a death and a death drive. Eros and Thanatos. And the delusions of a dialectic between them, or of any concrete dialectic whatsoever. As though the borders were concrete and impassable. A denial of immanence and contingency, as though there were each thing in its place, and no exchange value. The machine of solids there, and the liquid machine here, there, and here. As though there were one thing and the other thing, as opposed to one thing and the other thing, either or instead of either or. There is production. There is production of desire. There is the anti-production. It's sociality. Still, there is only desire, whether production or anti-production. There are flows and there are breaks. Nothing may break the flows of desire save desire itself. A modality that desires a break in a flow is a repressive desire. There is nothing but modes and attributes of an indissoluble substance as in Spinoza. Morally, there is rage, rape, destruction, loathing, antipathy, hatred, contempt, and pain. There is love, reverence, fraternity, exchange, calm, balance, trust, and pleasure. Somewhere there is a passion which bridges the two domains. They cannot be divorced from one another. What a mistake to have ever given passion either a positive or negative meaning, much as with suffering. When Dostoevsky wrote that suffering is the origin of consciousness, he never intended us to conceive of this as a bad thing. Otherwise, he would have been calling our origins negative, and thus every filament of our human experience would have been born of this negativity. If there is only negativity, then there is nothing positive. If there is nothing positive, then why say negative? Why the one and the other? In order to, Hegel, negate the given, we must first grasp the given, mustn't we? Alas, the given is lost. The origin, as Foucault reminds us in Man and His Doubles, retreats the more the question of it returns. This is, indeed, the paradox of origin. Neither the chicken nor the egg came first. The more we reach, the more lost we become. The schizophrenic is no madman. The businessman, the cop, the soldier, the general, the politician, the news anchor man, the factory owner, and the factory worker, too. They are madmen, every last one of them. Affirmation must be salvaged. And it is through the modern poetic inscription as constructed not through a critical discourse, but rather the interplay of lingual and prelingual intensities within certain ranges of activity that affirmation finds its voice. It is through the poetic flow that Dionysus speaks finally in all voices at once. There are two kinds of modern poetry: a poetry of affirmation and a poetry of dialectics. Dialectical poetry tends to be a social poetry, whereas affirmative poetry dedicates itself to the interplay of autonomous fluid desiring machines. It is the poetry that reminds of Nietzsche's great discovery that every name in history is I. This second and altogether more powerful manner of poetry finds its inscriptions buried in all forms of enunciation and écriture, wherein flows are allowed to manifest their own flight without being hindered by machines. This form of poetical inscription is as evident in the novels of Beckett and the fragments of Artaud as it is in the typographical poetry of Mallarmé, or the schizoid transhistoricism of Ezra Pound. It is evident also in those forms of cinematographic practice which correspond to what Gilles Deleuze calls the time image. In all these textual examples, flows are allowed to consummate themselves whilst furnishing multidirectional disjunctions, valuing rhythm and tone above sensory fallout and empirical postulates. Rhythm and tone are categories relating to a style, and this is precisely the point. It is style, not structure and form, that embody life. One's style, the differences inherent in the manner by which one conducts oneself insofar as one's body may be a conduit for various flows, is what sets one apart, and which thus gives one's life and consciousness an autonomous character. One has life insofar as one has style, and it is style that sets one apart. As soon as style becomes primary, a process is undergone. The I becomes muted and decentered, rendered little more than an abstract linguistic distinction, that from which utterances emerge. Also, the social becomes distanced to the extent that it is unreadably independent of the symptomatologies of self. The voices become distanced from the body. Life occurs apart from the corporeal. Another body, more abstract, must emerge. This is the body that Artaud first named the body without organs, a term picked up by Deleuze and Guattari in their two books on capitalism and schizophrenia. The corporeal is not represented in consciousness, but rather it produces an effect on the body without organs. Not at all a totalizing effect. After all, Judge Schreber believes that he has breasts, and for himself the experience and sensation of having these breasts is very real. Judge Schreber's delusion is poetical. After all, it is the poet who charts the most removed destinations of subject. The body of the poet has no organs. And so back to the question of death and the question of Emily Dickinson. From here we may begin to understand the way Emily Dickinson writes about death, and consequently how the modern poetical inscription invests its traces in her work. Derrida reminds us that death is an impossibility in his book Aporius. It is not impossible that my book and my body will die, so much it is impossible that death can happen to me in my life. It is rather that both death and life happen to a third term, a given body without organs. For Dickinson, particularly in the poem I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died, the moment of death is blurred. It's an instant where life undergoes a process of remission, and death undergoes a process of expansion from margins inward. Dickinson strives to overlap these processes by stretching the instant, effectively attempting to freeze it. A reader of the poem may immediately remark, yes, but this woman has not died. She is alive while she writes this down. They've missed the point. It is through the manual labor of writing this process down of inscribing it disjunctively on a body without organs, even before committing it to paper, that she has readily succeeded and died. She is not dead, but she has captured the furthest extremities of becoming dead. Death is not the end of the life here. It has no negative value. It is its own creative process. The poem affirms death as process. In the first stanza, the stillness in the room and the stillness in the air blur together between the heaves of storm. Still there is the independent fly, buzzing, as though it were from this sound that the deluge springs. The room is being internalized, slowed, appropriated in the imaginary as death enters the room from within, and with it its silent noise, its heaves of storm, sensed but not visually or orally, rather as pure disjunctive intensity, never quite reductive, never quite reducible. It's not the fly. It's not the forces acting outside the room. In the next stanza, there is an onset of complete sensory deterioration. Life retreats from the eye and from beneath the breath, although the life is not yet vanquished. Here we witness the last pull of the desire of life, the gathering firm for the last onset. The onset in question here retains the image of the heaves of storm. The death desire or death drive, not maybe thanatos, but rather a desire of the very process of death itself, which continues only insofar as it's necessarily desired. The process of life dwindling has been directly counterposed with the process of death flourishing. Although the processes blur together, just as the stillness of the air blurs together with the stillness of the room. The stanza ends with the invocation of the image of a phantom king as harbinger of death, or the body of death, the king, representative of death, connotes a profound sense of the reification of things that might seem unsettling. The idea that the face of death would be the king suggests, as Nietzsche might say, a devaluation of standard values. The royal death is a sign of affirmation, a welcoming death, a heightening of the admirability of death. The world of keepsakes, those which align the room, reducing the life there to its fetish character. Do the adornments stand for anything like the body itself, which houses the body of the subject, or the soul, as Dickinson would say? However, Dickinson reduces these materials to what portion of me may be assignable, suggesting that there is still some energy of life that cannot be assignable, and which cannot be exhausted either. Some mystical property of the soul which remains in the room. It is here that the fly interposes at a distant mode of difference, a conduit, bridging the void between life and death with its buzz, while remaining the province of neither. In the final stanza, Dickinson places the fly with its uncertain stumbling buzz between herself and the light. The light stands for vestiges of life, pushed to the very center by the darkness. Here the me becomes totally discentered and totally problematic, an abstractly disinherited subject afloat in the room, more a part of the fly's buzz than of the body about to die. Finally, the last vestige of light is squeezed out. Darkness overcomes. The last onset is over. The poem ends, and then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. The windows fail. The soul, robbed of light, is cut off from all material. Not only can it no longer see, but it cannot imagine seeing. The light is exhausted, and with it life's desire. Death is creatively affirmed. The king is granted his domain.